Instead of proposing marriage to the woman he loved, Stephen Marley was hiding in an apple orchard. To any onlooker, he would appear consumed by his task, diligent even, in his assessment of the trees he had carefully nurtured over the past 7 years in the sweeping plain of coastal soil, rich in nutrients from the sea and wind. But anyone with a keen eye would quickly realise Stephen had conducted the same inspection the previous day, whilst also avoiding proposing to the woman he loved. Dinsmore Castle and the Dukedom of Greyfair would be known for their exquisite apple crops, and Stephen Marley would die a bachelor. He made his way down the row of sweet Alford, until he reached the cross-section where they'd planted a row of Backwell Red, in experimentation. This type of apple had quickly become their most sought-after crop, and they'd been forced to find another portion of the coastal plain in which to plant. He turned left, heading deeper inland and to the heart of the orchard, where, if he stood perfectly still, he heard only the sound of the distant sea, the rustle of the apple trees around him, and the beat of his own heart. He walked quickly, moving deeper into the trees. As the muscles in his right foot tightened with each step, he marvelled at how quickly the orchards had grown. What had started as a few trees planted within the sheltering walls of Dinsmore Castle had soon expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. When he'd first had the idea to increase their apple yield, he had pictured it as another revenue source for the estate, jobs for the villagers and tradesmen. He'd never imagined Dinsmore Castle and the Dukedom of Greyfair would become the largest supplier of apples to the nation's cider industry. He paused briefly, fingering the delicate leaf of a crimson king, remembering that day when he'd approached his cousin with his idea. Lucas, as usual, had been open to the plan, but he'd had one caveat. He wanted Stephen to take 60% of the profits. Stephen had rejected it, of course. The apple orchards were for the estate, but Lucas insisted. At the time, the new railroad spur line had just become operational, and the farmers on the estate were rushing to get their goods to the London markets. Revenue was up, farmers were thriving, which in turn boosted the economy in the village and the need for tradesmen to keep the farms running. Lucas was content to accept 40% of whatever the orchards brought in. It came to be that 40% was a small fortune, and 60% fell somewhere between greed and gluttony. Even now Stephen couldn't quite understand what had transpired. He'd been the cast-off relation, the burden to the Dukedom of Greyfair, although his uncle and Lucas had never made him feel like a burden. It was simply hard not to feel as such when one was sent from one's home because of the unfortunate circumstance of being born with a twisted foot. How could Stephen have not thought of himself as a burden? Until now. Stephen's head turned unconsciously to the north. Even from where he stood, he could see the open gable of the cottage, its 3 dormers standing guard along the prow. Cottage. He ran a hand over his face and looked away, a maelstrom of emotions coursing through him. Guilt, shame, unease. He wasn't yet comfortable in his own newly established role as the orchardist on the estate, and he certainly wasn't used to the salary he brought in. He was suddenly a man of means and a house. He stared through the trees at the dormers as if they mocked him. If he wasn't comfortable with who he was now, how could he possibly expect the woman he loved to be? He knew perfectly well why he was hiding, and it wasn't because of the thought of proposing. He had already proposed 3 times, after all. It was because every time he proposed, Ethel Jones gave him another reason for refusing him. And as he gazed at the open gable protruding along the tops of the trees, he wondered if he was headed toward yet another refusal.